What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one I'm going to talk about wildcard in game week 6. My wildcard is currently active, so I'm going to go through my current draft and talk about other players that are up for consideration as well. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button. If you haven't already signed up to Fantasy Football Hub and you're on wildcard in particular, this is a great week to do it. There is still 50% off if you sign up for a yearly subscription, or you can just try it monthly. Really handy to plug your team in and see how it's going to look over the coming weeks and plan transfers and stuff like that. Links in the description below, and I'll talk a little bit more about it later on. So let's start, as always, with the goalkeepers and defenders. And as I go through the team, I'm going to talk about which players are absolutely locked in barring injury and are just not going to leave any of the drafts that I'm building at the moment. And I know when I put out drafts like this, I get a lot of questions about why isn't this player or that player being considered. I've got a whole list of other players being considered, which I'm going to talk about at the end of each section. Now, in goal, probably unsurprisingly, it's Davern from Arsenal. Even against Man City yesterday, where they conceded 2 goals and it was an away game, right? Really difficult. He puts up 9 saves, and obviously there was a little bit of game state about that because Arsenal were down to 10 men. They were just boxed in, defending, etc. But he still gets 9 saves and 4 points, which is pretty impressive. And then you've got a 9-pointer against Spurs away, a 10-pointer against Villa away, you know, an 8-pointer in game week 1 against Wolves at home. He is the pick of the goalkeepers. And I don't think there's really too much doubt that by the end of the season, Arsenal will have the most clean sheets. There will not be many teams that get close to them. Maybe Man City, maybe Liverpool. But I would expect Arsenal to be at the top. And with the fixtures they've got in the short term, it just kind of makes a lot of sense to go for him. He's gone up to 5.6, but I wildcarded quite early and I got him for 5.5. I don't usually like spending that much on a goalkeeper, but he's just set and forget. You put him in, and you don't worry about him until the next time you wildcard. The only times you're going to really transfer him out are if he gets injured, or like I said, on that second wildcard, because circumstances might mean that going for an Arsenal goalkeeper doesn't make sense. So he's very likely to be in. And also I like the fact that I can get him at 5.5, whereas if I want to go for someone like Saliba, he's 6 million, so it's a little bit more expensive. I'm not against dropping Raya to someone else, but I think it's quite likely that he makes the final team. I've also got Gabriel, double up on Arsenal defence. Gabriel is absolutely locked into this team, no matter what. I got a couple of questions yesterday when, you know, Timber started right back, Calafiori left back. Could we see at some point Ben White right back, Timber left back, and Calafiori left centre back, and Gabriel coming out of that team? It's something that I thought about in pre-season, and it is possible. I'm not saying that it's just never going to happen, but I think it's super unlikely. That partnership between Saliba and Gabriel is so good. I don't know why you would break it up. And Gabriel is such a threat from set pieces. It's why I owned him for so much of last year. And I just like having double Arsenal defence and you just don't worry about him. No matter what the fixture is, if you've got to play them, it's not the end of the world. And it's not a case now that I will just never bench my Arsenal players. But it would have to be some big reason to do that. Like, even when you get to, that's the list I'm going to talk about in a minute. Even when you get to game weeks 9, 10 and 11, when they got Liverpool at home, Newcastle away and Chelsea away, if I've got to play Gabriel, it's really not the end of the world. Look what he's just done in the last couple of game weeks. So double Arsenal defence is something I really want to do. And I highly doubt that I will use a transfer on them when the fixtures get tough between 9 and 11, because after that, they're great again. And you can just leave them in. And I did that last year. I wildcarded in 10 with just one Arsenal defender, Saliba, I think it was. Or Gabriel, actually. And then in game week 12, I bought Saliba in, and they were in for the rest of the season. They're just that good. Now, they're a bit more expensive this year, so at some point I might get rid of them. No plans to do that anytime soon. Trent stays. He's not a guarantee, but I think he's another player that's quite likely to be in. I think his attacking stats so far have been great, as we've kind of come to expect from him. And Liverpool's defensive record has also been really good. The reason that he's not a lock is because he's 7 million. And the fixtures coming up are a little bit more difficult. And I just don't rate Liverpool defence as high as Arsenal. But the fixtures aren't that bad. Like Wolves away, Palace away, okay, 2 away games. And then you've got Chelsea at home, Arsenal away. But after that, the fixtures are pretty good. So again, it's almost like a long-term pick that I just don't have to worry about. I think there are, when I get onto the attack, there are ways of dropping Trent and then getting like another premium midfielder in, which I think should be considered. But if I can, I really want to keep Trent in my team. I've still got Porro on the bench. I'm not that enamoured by Spurs defence, but from game week 8 onwards, they do have really nice fixtures. And with the way I've set this team up, I don't need to play Porro for Man United away or Brighton away if I don't want to. But then from game week 8 onwards, in any fixture I want to play him, he's just there ready. And I got him at 5.5 as well. He's gone up to 5.6. I think on paper, a Man City defender is better, like Vardiol. But he's more expensive. And I think he will play the majority of games, but he's not as nailed on as Pedro Porro is, and he's not as attacking either, although he can be. And maybe if Kyle Walker stays in the team, we'll see that happen. But for now, it's Porro. And then my two 4.5 million defenders-ish, because Dunk's gone up to 4.6, are Collins from Brentford and Dunk from Brighton. They just rotate really nicely. That's why I've gone for them. You can go for any 4.5 million combinations, and I'll talk about the other players up for consideration in a minute. The other thing I really like about this defence is it just rotates really well. So this is what it looks like in the My Team tool on Fantasy Football Hub. If you're on Wildcard this week, great time to get signed up. There's still 50% off on the yearly subscriptions, or if you just want to check it out monthly, you can as well. I'll put a link in the description below. So this week it's Trent, Gabriel, Collins, West Ham at home, Leicester at home, Wolves away. You go to game week 7, you're playing Trent again against Palace away, obviously Gabriel against Southampton at home. Collins has still got Wolves at home, so Dunk and Porro stay on your bench. I'm just going to change this to single game week. Game week 8, okay, Trent's got Chelsea at home, so you might not necessarily want to play him, but you're never going to be worried about playing Trent. You're going to play Gabriel again, then Porro comes in for West Ham at home for Collins. So again, you've still got Dunk and Collins on the bench. Game week 9, that's when it gets a little bit difficult because Gabriel and Trent play against each other. But you're probably not that worried about playing Gabriel. And even if you are, you've got Porro against Palace away, you've got Dunk against Wolves at home, and you've got Collins against Ipswich at home. Like, the rotation is just really good. Like, you can pick any game week. If I just go forward to, like, I've not checked this already, but let's hope it works. Game week 14, for example. It's not actually the greatest week, but Porro's got Bournemouth away, Gabriel Man United at home, and Trent Newcastle away. Game week 15, Trent Chelsea away, Everton away, Gabriel Fulham away, and you've got Newcastle at home and Leicester away on your bench in Collins and Dunk. It's not perfect, but we're talking like miles into the future here. You're going to have transfers at some point. The rotation is just really good. And I like using a tool like this to kind of check through that and make transfers along the way. So make sure you check that out, link in the description below. That defence rotates really nicely. Just quickly on Collins, I'm not sure who's the most nailed on centre-back for Brentford. Lots of fans saying that Collins has played so well that he's got to play and that Pinnock's been a little bit dodgy and that he could come out for Vandenberg. Pinnock has been their #1 centre-back for a while. Part of me thinks because of that worry, maybe I should ignore Brentford completely unless I go for the goalkeeper. But I do love that rotation. It's a bit more money on defence spent than I think a lot of people would do. But I think it works well for quite a long time. You just don't have to worry about those players. I'll try and quickly go through the other players up for consideration. Flecken and Edison, they're probably the only two goalkeepers that I will look at. If I go for a 4.5, I just think I'll go for Brentford's fixtures and I'll take Collins out of my defence. Edison, I don't see me going for. I've been here before. It never works out well for me. But I think if you were looking at Raya and Vardiol, that probably is the better combination for points if they keep playing. But if you've got any concerns about Vardiol, you could just go for Edison and Saliba instead to get those guaranteed minutes. But I just think the upside on Raya and Vardiol is just too kind of big to turn down. So I don't see Edison being in, but he's up for consideration. Saliba, of course, if I don't go for Raya, I'm definitely going for double Arsenal defence instead of attack. I think Havertz is fine, but I'll talk about forwards later on. And then I've just got a few 4.5s. Konza, absolutely nailed for Aston Villa. No concerns like Collins, Vardiol, who I've mentioned, and Lewis. The Lewis benching yesterday against Arsenal doesn't put me off massively. And I also don't think Kyle Walker was that good. I just don't know if I want that headache. But also, Lewis is only 4.7, so I will consider him, but I don't know if he'll make the final draft because he would have to probably take up that Porro spot. Because if I go for Lewis, I definitely want two 4.5s that are going to play and be decent in case things go wrong. So then I'm getting rid of like Porro or Vardiol. Not sure about Lewis. Mikalenko has dropped to 4.3 million. So if he's fit and available for Everton, their fixtures are pretty good, so I'll consider him. 4 million defender, of course. I might just try and cheapen out in my fifth defender spot to get more money elsewhere. Greaves is probably the best one at the moment that I'm considering, but there's other ones as well. Leif Davis, possibly from Ipswich. Van Dijk and Robertson if I don't go for Trent, but I feel like if I downgrade Trent, I'll just go to a different team altogether. Like Robertson, I'm just too worried about possible rotation with Tsimikas. It's not going to happen that often, but it can happen. And he's not as attacking as Trent. And then Van Dijk's fine, I guess, but I don't know if the Liverpool fixtures are good enough for clean sheets that I would want to. Like, Trent's fine because of the attacking potential, but Van Dijk, he could score from a corner, but I'm not sure about it. Colwill is fine, but I just think when I look at Chelsea's fixtures, there's not a huge amount that I'm expecting clean sheets from on the horizon. Like, next two are fine, Brighton and Forest at home, but they're both okay attacking teams. Then you've got Liverpool away. Newcastle at home is probably fine at the moment. They're not playing that well. Then it's United away, Arsenal at home. Like, it's a long-term pick, and they do have some nice fixtures later on. And I think the Chelsea defence is all right, but I don't know if he fits in as well as other players that I'm considering. But I do think he's pretty nailed. That might be famous last words on a Chelsea player, but I think he is nailed. And then, of course, Nottingham Forest, Aina or Murillo. I think Murillo is absolutely nailed on. I think Aina is pretty close to that as well. They're both 4.5. They also rotate nicely with Brentford defenders, so I could go for them instead of Brighton. It's a close call. I think 4.5 million defenders is one that I will leave to the last minute. Not last minute, sorry, but it'd be one of my last decisions. I think the big players are the ones to get in first, and then you work out where you're going to need those cheap rotating spots. So that's the defence at the moment. Let's talk about the midfield. So my current midfield is Saka, Mbeumo, Eze, McNeil, and then Morgan Rogers on the bench, because if I went with this draft in game week 6, I would play 3-4-3. You could argue that Rogers should be in the 11 and not McNeil, but that's a decision to be made much closer to the deadline. For now, I just want to figure out which players are going to be in the squad in general. In terms of locked-in players, the midfield is much more settled than my defence. So Saka, Mbeumo and Rogers are almost certainly going to make the final draft. With Saka, obviously, you've got the really good fixtures for Arsenal right in front of him. So Leicester at home, Southampton at home and Bournemouth away. After that, I know I've said that for Raya and Gabriel, I would probably just hold on to them. There is maybe an argument to move Saka on for Liverpool at home, Newcastle away and Chelsea away. But I think that's a decision to be made much closer to the time. Maybe move him to like a Son or a Cole Palmer instead. With this current draft, I've got no money in the bank. But hopefully by the time I get to game week 9, I'll have saved up a couple of transfers and I could make that switch if I wanted to. But I think the thing I like about Saka is there's never any concerns about his starts or his minutes. And if I get to game weeks 9, 10, 11 and I've got other issues to deal with, I'll just hold on to him because the fixtures are so good afterwards. So Saka is locked in no matter what. And I think that substitution yesterday against Man City was tactical, but obviously we can wait for more news. In Mbeumo, I don't think I really need to explain. Lots of people have been looking to bring him in ahead of this fixture run. The fixtures for Brentford are just so good for so long. He's nailed on. He's on penalties. The minutes are always fantastic. I think he's played, 90 minutes every single game apart from game week 1, where he played 89. He's just great. And I don't have any concerns about Brentford's attack with the players that they're missing through injury and stuff like that. I think they did well against Spurs. He put up 0.64 expected goals himself. He's just a great pick. He's just ridiculous value, so he will definitely be in. And then Morgan Rogers, he's gone up to 5.2, and you could maybe make an argument not to include him if you bought him late, but I got him for 5 million. I don't really have too many concerns about his minutes. At some point, could Watkins and Duran both start? Yes. If that happens, will Rogers play number 10? Maybe not. But he could still go and play off the left or something like that. He's the kind of player I feel like you just don't overthink. He's played the full match in every game in the league so far. He's playing as the number 10. He's finally got a couple of returns. I'm not expecting massive amount of returns from him, right? The underlying stats are not amazing, but he's only 5 million, for me anyway. And I think he's just worth paying that extra 0.5 over someone like Winks, basically. It's as simple as that. And he might go another 4 games without returning. It doesn't matter. As long as he keeps playing, I'm more than happy with him in my squad. And so he'll definitely be in the final draft. I don't see me taking him out. With Eze and McNeil, McNeil is not an exciting pick whatsoever. But as always, you can't own everyone, especially with the prices that FPL have gone with this season. And if I want double Arsenal defence, Raya and Gabriel, and I want to keep Trent, and I want Porro later on, and I also want Saka, something has to give somewhere. And of course, I've got Haaland, surprise, surprise. And McNeil is only 5.4 million. That's the reason that he's in. And the fixtures for Everton are just very good for quite a while, like up until game week 14. So he can just be used as part of a rotation. I don't even need to play him every single week, but he's absolutely nailed on, and the fixtures are decent. And that's basically the only reason he's in, because he's so cheap. I don't think he's necessarily better than Smith Rowe long term, for example, but he is a little bit less money. For what it's worth, I bought Smith Rowe at 5.5, so he's only actually 0.1 million more than McNeil to me. And I've already sold him, and I'm wondering if that was a mistake. But I'm not sure he would have made the final draft anyway. But maybe he would have. I think I might have made a mistake there. Because if you look at Fulham's fixtures, the next two aren't great. Forest away and City away. But then you've got Villa at home, Everton away, Brentford at home, Palace away, Wolves at home. I just think when you've got Smith Rowe at 5.5 versus McNeil at 5.4, there was probably a case to keep Smith Rowe. And I may have been a little bit hasty. But now at this point, I'd have to buy Smith Rowe back at 5.8. It's just probably not worth getting the money for. The other player that I'm probably going to look at for that spot is Semenyo instead of McNeil. But at the moment, I don't have the money for it, so I'd have to make a downgrade somewhere. Mikalenko instead of Collins or Dunk would give me that money, and that is definitely something that I'll think about. And then Eze, he's a bit like Bruno Fernandes, but cheaper. Been extremely frustrating so far this season. Only one attack and return. I just like the price still. He's dropped to 6.9 already. He may drop to 6.8. I can buy him back at 6.8 because I've already sold him from my actual wildcard draft. He's played every minute of every game so far. The fixtures aren't amazing in the short term. Everton away, Liverpool at home, Forest away. But then afterwards they get good. And he's just absolutely... I just like players like that. I know people want to go for the fancy picks that might go and get you a massive score but aren't necessarily nailed on. It's just not how I like playing the game. It's just my strategy, right? It is what it is. You know that. Even if you've watched the channel for a while, you know that's how I play. And Eze I just don't have those concerns about. And I think at that price, like who else for that money or less is there to even consider? Like I could go for, you know, like McNeil and Semenyo, or McNeil and Smith Rowe, just two of those three players and spend money elsewhere. But I still think at that price, Eze is decent value. Like around 6.9 million... Potentially, I could take a punt on someone like Savinho from Man City, who's only 6.5. He's started every game he's been fit for so far. And they've got a really good fixture on. Newcastle away, Fulham at home, Wolves away, Southampton at home. I've just been here so many times with Man City players. At some point, he will get benched. It will just happen. We know it. We all know it deep down. That's what's going to happen. It's just a case of when it is and can he get enough returns outside that. I thought he was great against Arsenal yesterday. And he's got easier fixtures coming up. Maybe that is the punt spot. Maybe if I go with this draft, I take one punt. The problem is I've only got one free transfer. And lots of people are wildcarding with like 2, 3, 4. They're in a much stronger position to take punts like this. Basically, what I don't want to happen is to get a couple of game weeks down the line, I've got issues and Savinho is a problem with game time. Like I've got one or two other injuries to fix. And Savinho is also a consideration for getting rid of. I just don't have the transfers to deal with. I don't know if I want to put myself in that position. So that's why I've gone boring with Eze. Like Brennan Johnson, Garnacho, they're all players that I would love to have. I just don't know if I can get behind their minutes, basically. Whereas Eze, for a little bit more money, you know he's always going to play. And Mateta was off at half-time in the match at the weekend. Eze would have been on penalties at that point. He also came quite close to scoring again. I just like him as a pick. And I think if I go with this kind of structure, he'll probably be in. So I forgot to go through the list of other midfielders that I'm considering. So let's just quickly do that now. So I've got Salah at the top, but that's mostly so I don't forget to talk about him. I think the chances of him making my final draft are almost zero. Unless something major happens, like Erling Haaland gets an injury. And then, of course, I'll spend the money on Salah. But unless that happens, I just don't see how he makes it. Because I really want Salah at 10 million with the fixtures that Arsenal have got. Haaland's going nowhere. So Salah would have to be in as an addition. I just don't think it works. I think you have to make too many sacrifices elsewhere. And it's not that I think Salah's a bad pick, because he's clearly not, right? He will get consistent returns over this season. But I just don't think he's worth the money when I've got Saka and Haaland. There's too many sacrifices. He will not make the final draft. Palmer and Son only really work if I drop Trent and put my forward line a little bit cheaper. Essentially in midfield, because in Mbeumo, Rodgers and Saka are locked, I'm only playing with two spots. And obviously one of them is like a McNeil or Semenyo spot. So really it's that Eze position. And to go from Eze to Palmer or Son requires a couple of downgrades elsewhere. And realistically, Trent would have to go. So am I prepared to give Trent up to put another premium midfielder in? I'm not against it, I'll say that. But I don't think it's that likely. I think between Palmer and Son, Palmer's got the better fixtures next 2 game weeks. But you could argue longer term that actually it's Spurs. Because game week 8 is West Ham at home, then it's Palace away, Villa at home, Ipswich at home. Man City away in 12 is tough, but then it's Fulham at home, Bournemouth away. And also the thing I like about Son is he's cheaper. Right, he's only 10 million, whereas Palmer's 10.5. And money's already quite tight in these wildcard 6 drafts. I don't think I could stretch the Palmer. So he's less likely. Son, maybe. I don't think it will happen, but it could. Bruno Fernandes, if you watched the stream last night, is definitely up for consideration. I think there's a good chance that he makes the final draft. I know he's been frustrating so far, but realistically, it would be between like him and Diaz, depending on the structure. And Diaz has been amazing, and I think most people watching this video will go for Diaz. And I think it makes a lot of sense. He's had 3 double-digit hauls so far, 16, 15, and 14 points. But I can't look past the fact that he keeps getting subbed early. Like, he's only made it past 71 minutes once, and that was game week 1. And Gakpo's there. And Gakpo played in the Champions League. We know from what Slot said that he wanted to play Gakpo in game week 4, but he wasn't fit enough. And obviously that's a big plus to Luis Diaz, that he was able to go away on international break and come back fitter. I get that. But at some point that might not be the case. And I just keep picturing, in a couple of game weeks' time, probably not against Chelsea or Arsenal, by the way, because you'd want to play your first choice left winger, which is definitely Diaz. But at some point, Diaz is going to blank. It can happen, right? It's already happened a couple of times this season. And then the next game, Gakpo might play because of rotation. And all of a sudden, you start questioning whether Diaz is a great pick anymore. And I just don't want to necessarily put myself in that position. I think it makes sense for a lot of people just to go for Diaz. Like, he's got Wolves away next as well, who are terrible defensively. But I think for my play style, given that the price is quite close now, it would make more sense just to go for Bruno. And Bruno's actually, I know the returns aren't there, but the stats have actually been pretty good. Like, if I look him up on Hub, again, obviously, if you want to sign up, all the tools, link in the description below. Fernandes is at 0.37 non-penalty expected goals this season and 0.27 expected assists. They're pretty decent numbers. Diaz, in comparison, is better, right? Not arguing that whatsoever. 0.68 non-penalty expected goals, 0.17 expected assists. But he doesn't play 90 minutes that often. So you've got to put that into context. If you go to totals instead of per 90 minutes, Luis Diaz is 2.71 expected goals, 0.68 expected assists. So it's just over 3 in total. And if you go for Fernandes, he's put up 1.79 and 1.32. So also close to 3. So Diaz is slightly better, but not that much. Slightly more goal threat so far. And look, some people might say Bruno Fernandes isn't as good a finisher. But actually, if you go back and look at XG versus goals, Fernandes often is about equal, if not slightly higher. Fernandes is a pretty good finisher. So if I'm going to go for one of the two, it's probably going to be Fernandes. Am I going to regret it? Possibly. But I just think with European matches and stuff like that starting up, who will I know is going to start every game? Fernandes. I can't say that about Diaz. Plus, Fernandes is on penalties. We haven't had a huge amount so far in the league, and there is going to be less than last year, I think. Everything points to Fernandes. I don't mind Bowen if I want to take a little bit of money out of that spot again. So instead of Eze, go for Bowen. I think West Ham's fixtures aren't bad. But I think, I don't know, West Ham just looking a bit of a tricky spot right now. I'm not sure the fans are that happy with what's going on at the moment. Is that the right time to buy Bowen? Possibly. Maddison, I said on stream yesterday that I wasn't going to go for. And I don't think I will. But at 7.5 million with the numbers he's putting up so far, not a bad pick. The minutes have been okay as well. He's not a 90-minute man, but they're all right. And I really like Spurs fixtures from 8 onwards. I really would like a piece of that attack. So Maddison is up for consideration versus like a Bowen. But again, if it's between him and Fernandes, I know who I'm going to pick. And then Semenyo, I really want him instead of McNeil if I can afford it. The next 2 fixtures for Bournemouth are really good. He loves a shot as well. And although, sorry, I'm going back and forth a little bit here. Although after Southampton at home and Leicester away, it's Arsenal, Villa and City. The fixtures after that are pretty good again for Bournemouth. So he could be looked at as a long-term pick that often, sorry, not often, always starts, often gets to 90 minutes. And like I said, loves to shoot and came very close to a goal against Liverpool. So that's the other midfielders under consideration. Realistic ones who could make it into the final draft. Probably just Semenyo, Fernandes and Son. I'm not sure any of the others do. And then up front, I've got Erling Haaland, Dominic Solanke and Dominic Calvert-Lewin as well. And as you might have guessed, Erling Haaland going absolutely nowhere. He has scored in every single game for Man City so far, including Arsenal yesterday. And Rodri did pick up what looked like a really bad injury and he could be out for a while. And I've already seen some people say that Man City will be worse without him, which is true, of course. But I think it's also worth remembering that Rodri missed the first 3 games of the season and Haaland scored 7 goals in 3 games. So I'm not particularly worried about that. I will say, though, that for those 3 games, a certain Kevin De Bruyne played in all those matches, and he was obviously out at the Arsenal game. So if Rodri and De Bruyne are missing, maybe there is some concern about Haaland, but certainly not enough to go without him. Like, Newcastle look really poor at the moment. That's who he's playing away this week. Then it's Fulham at home, Wolves away, Southampton at home. I want him for those 2 home games in particular. After that, we can worry about whether or not he needs to go because of no Rodri and maybe no De Bruyne. That decision is not going to be made now. There is no way I'm wildcarding without Haaland. Solanke, I think, is a pretty good option. I really wish we knew whether he was on penalties or not. Because if Son takes them, Solanke's not quite such a good option. But he is playing number 9 for a Spurs team that create a lot of chances, as we saw against Brentford. And as I've mentioned a few times now, the fixtures for Spurs from game week 8 onwards are pretty good. So I would just have him in there, ready for those fixtures later on. Some people will be asking me, why am I not looking at Havertz? I really like double Arsenal defence. Why am I not looking at Nicholas Jackson? I think Jackson's actually a pretty good pick, but he's not up for consideration for me because I've only got 1 transfer. And I think if you look at Chelsea's fixtures, Brighton at home and Forest at home are not bad. But then it's Liverpool away, Newcastle at home, Man United away and Arsenal at home. Not awful maybe, but not great either. And you could start with Jackson and then move to Solanke in game week 8 when Spurs fixtures get better. But again, I've only got 1 free transfer. And I think you really need to consider that when you're building squads and consuming content and stuff like that. The way you set up your team will be different depending on how many transfers you've got. Someone with 3 or 4 transfers might think, happy with the rest of the team, I'm going to go with Jackson. Then I'll figure out whether to get Solanke or someone else later. That's fine. But for me, I'd rather just have that player in place right now. And also, Solanke's got Man United away and Brighton away. Like, he will get chances in those games, even though if they're not great on paper. And then Calvert-Lewin, obviously blanked against Leicester. But he played another 90 minutes, and the fixtures coming up are just good. And I got him at 5.9. He's now gone up to 6 million. Like, as long as he can stay fit, like, you can just hold him right up until like game week 14 and just worry about whether or not to transfer him to someone else then. Also, I haven't got João Pedro in this team, who is still under consideration because he's so cheap. Like, he's got really good fixtures from game week 12 onwards. So I could just start with Calvert-Lewin, go for the fixtures, and then just maybe bring João Pedro in later on. The other forward really up for consideration is Watkins, maybe. But he's 9 million, and it's tricky for me to fit him in. Like, I could go for him instead of Bruno Fernandes and put in a much cheaper midfielder, but I'm not sure I like that as much. And also with Watkins, he's probably not on penalties. You can get cheap forwards like Calvert-Lewin, João Pedro, Chris Wood that are. And I think I'd rather do that and just spend more money in my defence or midfield than go for Watkins. So Watkins is like Salah. He's not a bad pick, but I don't see him making the final draft. With João Pedro, he didn't start yesterday, came on and got that tackle from Morgan Gibbs-White, didn't look comfortable afterwards. I'm sure he'll be fine going forward, but that's something I need to monitor. I also think game week 7, 8 and 9 are okay, like Spurs at home, Newcastle away and Wolves at home. But overall, they've got to play Chelsea, Spurs, Liverpool and City from now until game week 11. It really is game week 12 onwards where the fixtures get really good. So because of his price, if I was stuck for funds for a different move in my wildcard draft, I might just go for João Pedro and wait for him to be a decent option later on. But I think I'd rather get players in and target the fixtures for now. So I think it's more likely that Chris Wood makes it than João Pedro right now. He's 6.1 million. As we saw, he took the penalty yesterday ahead of Morgan Gibbs-White, which some people always thought he was going to. Morgan Gibbs-White had taken the previous 3, but to be fair, Chris Wood wasn't on the pitch for any of those games, and he has got a really good record. He keeps starting. Awani's not getting many minutes. And apart from Chelsea away in 7, the fixtures from 6 to 11 are decent. Then it's Arsenal away in 12, but then it's Ipswich at home in 13. And I've got other players that I can play if I don't want to play Chris Wood in those more difficult fixtures. So I think there's a good chance that Chris Wood will make the final draft. But that's what it looks like right now. Gabriel, Saka, Mbeumo, Rodgers and Haaland absolutely locked in. Every other spot is up for debate. I think Trent's likely to make it. I think one of McNeil or Semenyo, etc. But those 5 players are locked in. Let's just do a little bit of tinkering and more rambling. So this is the squad that I just showed you. I'm just going to go through some other ways that I could possibly play it. So one is, of course, to do Solanke to Chris Wood. And I think Chris Wood just feels to me like great value. 6.1, looks to be nailed on, fairly good minutes on penalties as well, decent goal threat. I really do think there's a high chance he makes that final draft, and I just go for the Haaland and 2 cheap forward strategy. But obviously once he comes in for Solanke, there's a bit more money to spend. So at that point, Eze would probably just go to Bruno Fernandes, and I would just leave the rest exactly the same. Like, again, it could be Luis Diaz, it could be Bowen. I kind of like Fernandes, but I'm not going to talk about that anymore because it's getting very boring. If I don't go for Trent, then instead of Fernandes, someone like Son could come in. And in that Trent spot, I'd have 5.3 million to spend. So I could go Gabriel, Porro, and then 3 4.5s a rotation. I think if I go the non-Trent route, I'm more likely to go for Flecken. There's always knock-ons. When you take a couple of players out, it kind of shifts the overall structure. But if I go for Flecken, I can just pick Saliba instead and just have those 2 Arsenal defenders to play most weeks. And I've got 3 other defenders to pick from for that final spot. So I quite like that setup. That would also give me 0.3 million in the bank. If I went from Dunk, this is the kind of thing I'm going to be doing all week, by the way. If I went from Dunk to Mikalenko, who hopefully will be back from illness soon and start playing at 4.3, I can actually afford Pedro Porro to Vardio instead. I do like Man City's fixtures. So although I've got Flecken in goal instead of Raya, who a lot of people will go for, I've still got double Arsenal defence. Bearing in mind that Saliba can also score goals as well. Gabriel is the main threat. But Saliba scored twice last year, twice the season before. So it is possible he will get goals too. Then you've got Vardio, and I've still got the Brentford and Everton players to cover me. So I quite like that setup. I think if I was going to go for an extra premium alongside Saka, it would probably be something like that. And also, I've got 0.1 million in the bank with this team. It's possible that Vardio might drop to 5.9 million before the deadline. And if he does, then McNeil can go to Semenyo. I really want to get Semenyo in if I can. I think he's a really good option and probably Bournemouth's best attacker at the moment. So a structure like that also works really nicely. Of course, I could just drop Son back to Fernandes and then Vardio back to Trent. And that's kind of what I'm working with, basically. Like, so it's okay to look at that and say Fernandes is a bad pick, and it's better to have Son. Of course it is. But then I've got to drop Trent. So you've got to choose where you make your sacrifice. And I think, I probably already said this, but we're coming up to a period now where there's going to be a lot more midweek matches. Doesn't matter for Fernandes. And from 8, you've got Brentford at home, West Ham away, Chelsea at home, Leicester at home, Ipswich away, Everton at home. Like, it's a good fixture run for a player that's always going to play and has gotten chances. He just hasn't put any of them away yet. So it's interesting. I don't think Gabriel's locked, but Raya isn't. I think he's a good option, but I quite like the idea of going for Flecken and just spending my money elsewhere. Also, with this, because I'd have 2 Arsenal defenders, if I wanted to get Porro in for Spurs' good fixtures, I could just sell Saliba and just keep Gabriel and Trent and then maybe go back to double Arsenal defence later on. So it leaves my options open a little bit more. If I go for Raya and Gabriel, I'm not going to want to sell either of them. Not that I should really be looking to sell Arsenal defence, but it's definitely something that's up for consideration. So that's what I'm playing with. I don't see Jackson going in or Watkins. It's probably going to be Haaland, Calvert-Lewin, and then one of Wood or Solanke. It's probably going to be Semenyo or McNeil, Fernandes or Eze, and then the defence just depends on whether I have Trent or not. I do like that draft, though, with Son. I think it could work really well. As long as Liverpool start conceding some goals, I think that's pretty nice, especially if Vardio drops to 5.9. I think that looks really nice. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. If you've enjoyed that, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button. If you're listening on podcast, rate 5 stars. I'll be back tomorrow with transfer tips. Let me know in the comments how much you hate Bruno Fernandes as an FPL pick, and I'll catch you again tomorrow.